There is a finding of not guilty as to every count and each defendant of conspiracy, official misconduct, and obstruction of justice.
The judge acquits 3 police officers of all charges in an alleged cover-up.
A Cook County judge acquits 3 police officers of all charges in an alleged cover-up to protect Jason Van Dyke in the Laquan McDonald shooting.
Justice for everybody but African Americans in this county of Cook.
And the backlash to today's not guilty verdicts has begun. A look at what it all may mean moving forward.
I like to see what we're doing at O'Hare 21 is making sure that O'Hare stays the best airport in the United States of America.
Inside the 5 proposals to redesign O'Hare's Terminal 2 as part of the $8.5 billion expansion plan. Could marijuana help keep people off of opioids in light of startling overdose numbers? And swapping the cocktail for a mocktail. It's all part of a new trend called Dry January. We drink in the details of the fad and its potential benefits.
He uses the ancient art of Irish storytelling and spins it in a very modern way.
Actor Brendan Coyle talks about his new show at the Goodman Theater, plus the experience of playing a key role in Downton Abbey. And Heather Henson talks about staging a show for the Chicago International Puppet Theater Festival and growing up as the daughter of Jim Henson. All that and more next on Chicago Tonight.
Thanks for joining us, and thanks for reading that, Brandis. I'm Paris Schutz. First tonight, exploring today's verdict in the police conspiracy trial. Brandis begins our coverage.
In Paris, Cook County Judge Dominica Stevenson today acquitted 3 police officers of conspiring to cover up the controversial circumstances surrounding the fatal shooting of teenager Laquan McDonald in 2014. The trial shone a bright light on what many critics have said is a code of silence that operates within the police department. They say it prevents officers guilty of wrongdoing from being held accountable. WTTW News reporter Matt Masterson was in the courtroom today. He joins us now. Matt, what happened in court and how did the judge go about making her finding?
So Judge Stevenson read off a prepared statement today. She spoke for about an hour, but she made it pretty clear early on that the verdict was not going to go against these men. Stevenson walked through the prosecutor's case almost on a line-by-line basis, going through the extensive background here, and she continually pointed out how these prosecutors failed to prove their case. She dismissed dash cam video evidence which showed the shooting, saying that it didn't match up with what Jason Van Dyke, the officer who shot Laquan McDonald, and Joseph Walsh, his partner who was charged in this case, were seeing during the shooting. She also dismissed the testimony of some of the state's main witnesses, including Dora Fontaine, a Chicago police officer who was on the scene the night of the shooting, and she testified that David March, the lead detective who was also a defendant in this case, had fabricated a statement and attributed it to her in his official report. Judge Stevenson did not find her to be a credible witness, citing conflicting testimony that Fontaine had given in the past. Stevenson said the crux of this case really came down to whether these men lied in official reports in an effort to try and cover for Jason Van Dyke and make sure that he wasn't going to face a criminal prosecution. But every attorney I've spoken to in this case talks about how difficult a case of conspiracy is to prove, and Judge Stevenson's ruling made it very clear that she was just not buying the prosecutor's case.
Right, and after the judge's verdict, defense attorney Todd Pugh and special prosecutor Patricia Holmes shared their reactions.
She heard every word of the testimony in this trial, and she concluded, as we did a year before, that there never was a case here. Despite all of the interest that all you have, there never, ever was a case.
We, of course, disagree with the ruling, but we respect the ruling. It is the constitutional right of individuals to have a trial by judge or a trial by jury. We do hope that this has been a crack in the wall of the code of silence and that others will think twice about engaging in conduct that might land them in an investigation such as this.
And Matt, what was the reaction inside the courtroom after the verdict was announced?
Well, during the hearing, the men were all pretty straight-faced. They're all pretty somber. David March, one of the defendants, was cracking some jokes, but the rest were pretty stone-faced as they went into it. Of course, that changed once the judge made her ruling. There were some smiles and handshakes among the defendants and their attorneys. I think there was a bit of clapping in the courtroom. Once that came out, there were plenty of police supporters who were there with them. And during the trial, you could actually hear some of the prosecutors sort of realize how this case was going to go. I was sitting next to their table with the prosecutors, and you could hear some sighs as the judge continuously sort of poked holes in their case and sided with the defense on various issues. Outside the courtroom, some of the same activists who were cheering when Jason Van Dyke was convicted in the murder of Laquan McDonald last year, they were expressing a fear that this verdict, coming just one day before Jason Van Dyke is sentenced, could have an impact on what sentence he does receive.
And activists, including Laquan McDonald's great-uncle Marvin Hunter, said this verdict reinforces what they call a code of silence within the police department.
It solidifies it and it bolsters it and it keeps it intact and in play. I don't think that we need a code of silence to have a civilized justice system in a country like America.
This judge told us our lying eyes did not see what we saw. That is an insult to the intelligence of our community.
We want justice for Laquan. Don't protest, go vote. Turn this tragic incident into political power. That's what we need to do. I'm not saying take to the streets anymore. It's time for us to take to the polls.
And the Fraternal Order Police, they've been behind these officers throughout this trial. How did they receive the verdict?
As you can imagine, they were pretty pleased with the result of this. FOP representatives have been in the courtroom every day throughout this trial and also through Jason Van Dyke's trial. They saw this trial as being completely baseless. They said that there was undue pressure put on for a conviction for these men based on media reports and the intense media pressure that went on with this case. But even with the acquittal, the union believes that this case itself could have a chilling effect on officers who are on the streets after seeing these men who conducted what the union says was a completely by-the-book investigation following this shooting of Laquan McDonald, that they were brought up on charges even though they did nothing wrong.
And police union boss Kevin Graham, he says that the trial should never have even taken place.
These three officers spent their careers serving the citizens of the city of Chicago. For that, we have seen their names dragged through the mud on a baseless criminal trumped-up case by the special prosecutor, Patricia Holmes. There was no conspiracy, and let me make this very clear, there was no code of silence.
And additionally, Officer Joseph Walsh did have just a few words to say to the media when asked about the impact of the trial.
Heart-wrenching, heartbreaking for my family, a year and a half.
What's been the most difficult part?
I have nothing else to say.
And Matt, is there anything further that can come from this case?
No, the men have been acquitted, so there was not going to be any sort of appeal of these convictions. And they also can't be retried on these charges. Double jeopardy will apply. March and Walsh have already left the force. They and their attorneys weren't ready to say whether or not they would even attempt to get their jobs back after this acquittal. Thomas Gaffney, on the other hand, the other defendant, he was reportedly reinstated today. He had been suspended while this case was ongoing.
Okay, Matt, thank you. And we know you will be back in court for tomorrow's sentencing of former officer Jason Van Dyke for second-degree murder in the death of Laquan McDonald. You can follow Matt's coverage on our website and watch the sentencing hearing there live starting at 9 a.m. Now we go back to Paris for more on today's verdict and its potential impact on Chicago police. Paris.
Brandis, what impact, if any, will today's verdict have on reform at the police department and ending what some see as a code of silence? The answer to those questions remain up in the air. And given the ruling, what is the status of efforts to improve the relationship between police and the communities they serve? Joining us to share their perspectives are Sharon Fairley, the former chief administrator of the Independent Police Review Authority and its replacement, the Civilian Office of Police Accountability. Fairley is currently a lecturer at the University of Chicago. Craig Futterman, a clinical law professor and policing expert at the University of Chicago Law School. Criminal defense attorney Gal Pasetsky of the law firm Pasetsky and Berliner, and Peter Kokonis, a retired Chicago police sergeant. Welcome, all of you. First, Sharon Fairley, did Judge Stevenson reach the correct verdict in your mind?
So I wasn't at the trial, and you know, I wasn't there for the presentation of evidence, so I'm not going to judge her ruling. But I think what we can take away from this is that these cases are just really, really difficult to bring. And we know that criminal convictions of police officers are exceedingly rare. Chicago's not unusual from that vantage point. But the key thing to focus on here is we need to make sure that the system that we have in place can prevent this from happening in the future. And that's where I think our focus really should be from this point on, is really looking to the department, what changes are we making to make sure that we have some systemic preventions in place to make sure this can't happen again.
Craig Futterman, you've been intimately involved in this case from the beginning. Were you surprised at this verdict?
Sadly, I wasn't surprised. But I guess what I was surprised by how painful it was to actually listen to the judge give that verdict. Because what I wound up hearing from a judge, and this won't make me popular among judges and certainly won't make me popular among lawyers, was what sounded like from a judge a full-throated defense, the full-throated defense of not only the cover-up, but actually of the murder of Laquan McDonald. It sounded like I was listening to the defense attorney there. This was an historic case and an historic prosecution, and one of the reasons this happened was because people stood up and people in the community actually forced the release of this video. And as some of the comments that I heard, it was as though everything that we've all seen with our own eyes wasn't true. This, in my view, is a real travesty of justice today, and when there was an historic opportunity to actually make a real dent in the code of silence so that officers will think twice, like, is this really worth it? Is it really worth it to cover up for a fellow officer when it's my job, when it could even be my freedom on the line?
Well, clearly the judge ruled there was no cover-up. Gal Pasetsky, she says, quote, two people with two different vantage points could describe the same event differently and not be lying. So is it believable in your mind that officers March, Gaffney, and Walsh saw a different Laquan McDonald than we saw on the dash cam video because of where they were situated?
Absolutely. When you're at the scene of a crime or in a scene when you watch something, two people see it from two different vantage points, and you have the camera too that was played over and over during the Van Dyke case, but that was not the vantage point that Van Dyke saw things happening either. So I think the camera is a little misleading, and the way that the camera was portrayed in the Van Dyke case is a lot different than the camera that was portrayed in this case. And you have eyewitnesses that saw things from a different perspective. For example, the eyewitness that the Judge Stevenson discredited in a way, he was sitting 2 cars away and he was being told to turn around, wasn't really have any interaction with the officers. The important thing to remember here, it was a conspiracy case where they didn't really have any agreements or any evidence that these officers actually agreed to commit a crime.
Together to commit a crime. Peter Kokonis, how much would a verdict like this impact morale in the police department?
Well, I think the verdict, it was a right and just verdict because the judge followed the law, followed the facts, followed the evidence. And to say anything less, it would be terribly wrong. You have to have the police and the bad guys, everybody's got to be treated fairly. And you can't turn around and say that this judge made a mistake here or this judge made a mistake there. I thought she presented a defense for those, a verdict on what these officers did, and she went page by page, report by report, the GPRs of the detectives, the reports of the police officers. And because Mr. Futterman is involved or is friends with Jamie Calvin, and you know,
who was a journalist who first broke this story.
Right, but my problem there is Mr. Calvin was given information regarding this case from Preckwinkle when the judge put a seal on the case. So why is he sitting there getting information that nobody else, no lawyers, no civilians, the people in the community, none of them got any of that information, but Preckwinkle gave it to her friend, Mr. Calvin.
Some questions she's been facing. Craig Futterman, I want to return to something you said. The judge seemed to disagree with a lot of the conclusions that the jury in the Van Dyke trial came to, so could this ruling affect that sentencing tomorrow?
I don't think so. I think that Judge Gahn is going to do what he thinks is fair and just and right, and I don't think he's going to be impacted by what happened today. I'm not making any predictions about what he's going to do, but I can say that that Judge Gahn is going to try to arrive at a sentence that he believes. I may not agree with it. You may not agree with it. Maybe everybody on all sides won't agree with it, but I think he's going to try to find a sentence that he thinks is the right thing in this
Sharon
case.
Fairley, could a verdict like this impact the appeal of Jason Van Dyke?
I don't really think so. I think that they're separate matters, and so this is really a different question. This conspiracy case rather than the murder case. So I really don't think so, and that's why I'm really focused on what the systems are what we can do to make sure that this doesn't happen. We know that we have a department. In my experience, as chief administrator, police officers just do not like calling each other out. It's just really uncomfortable for them. And so what are we doing to change that culture? What are we doing to make sure that they become comfortable with holding each other accountable? That's what really needs to happen. That's what needs to change about this department. And we need to make sure that we have systems in place and protocols in place to make sure that that happens.
And you were instrumental in trying to lead some of those reform efforts. Gal Pasitsky, do you think a verdict like this pours cold water on efforts to bring forward a consent decree and reform the police department?
I don't think so. I think that these officers wrote in reports what they saw, and I think these officers acted in a way that any officer should act because they preserved the evidence. We did have the tape. We did have all the evidence that they needed to put Van Dyke on trial. These officers may have had some inconsistencies in the reports, but the bottom line is that they said that there was a battery, and the battery was charged in the Van Dyke's case. And so I don't think that that will affect anything with the reforms.
Peter Kokonis, is there a code of silence anywhere in the police department? Clearly the judge found not in this specific case. Is there a culture of a code of silence?
I don't know if it's a culture of a code of silence. I believe that gangs don't snitch on each other, lawyers don't snitch on each other. I just think that in the police department, when I worked in the Internal Affairs Division, I don't believe there was a code of silence that everyone believes that there is now. I think policemen will turn in a corrupt policeman. That's how we got convictions of extortion and robberies and things like that in the Watts case, in the Majanowski case, in the Pac-Man case. It was policemen who came forward that gave information and evidence against other policemen. Now, if you're going to tell me if I call somebody, what's the vernacular, out of their name, or I swear at somebody on the street, am I supposed to turn to my partner and say, I'm going to go tell the sergeant on you, or somebody going to turn to me and say, I'm going to tell the lieutenant on you? It's a different weight there.
So little things like that.
Yeah,
Someone's
it's a different weight there, but they're not going to cover up extortion, murder, robbery, rape. These policemen that unfortunately I participated in investigations of them, policemen actually came forward and said this is what happened, because policemen who are crooked are putting these other policemen jobs and lives on the line.
Let me ask you this, Sharon Fairley, has that been your experience when you led IPRA and you led COPA? Do you agree with Mr. Kokonis?
So my experience is that the problems that we face is that the way the process works is there's just too much opportunity for officers to get their story straight. And even if there's no nefarious intent to do that, there's opportunity. So for example, this occurred back when the rule didn't require that officers be separated after a shooting. So they all went back to the area headquarters together and they sat down and they talked about it. And so that, even if they didn't intend to conspire to make up a story, they had this
perception problem.
Right, they had this opportunity. One person listens to what the other person says, and then it says, well, I'm going to adopt the same story. These are the kind of systemic changes that we need to make sure that this doesn't
happen. How equipped is the city now in 2019 to deal with a situation like this, should it arise again, as opposed to when this case happened in 2014?
Yeah, I mean, this highlights the need for that external review, that external oversight, and as Sharon said, what's going to happen next? CPD has shown that they haven't been able and they're not going to change this stuff on their own. I mean, where I agree and I disagree with Mr. Kokonis, what I agree with is that a code of silence and corrupt actions, criminal actions by police officers hurt good police officers, honest, hardworking police officers more than anything else in the world. But what I disagree with is about officers coming forward, even in the cases that you talked about. In the Watts case, the officers who came forward, what happened to them? They almost, it's like their lives were made a living hell because they broke the code of silence. Same thing in Midzanowski case. What happened, and actually a jury found that code of silence in the Midzanowski case, ATF agents who participated, their whole careers and their lives were put on the line because they stuck their necks out. And this is going after really bad criminal behavior and talking about good police officers and ending good police officers' career. So that's the problem that I have with this verdict also, is that not only does it send a bad message to the community, but I think it also sends a bad message to the officers who are doing their jobs. In this case itself, too, it was someone within law enforcement. So Beck and I agree with you. It was someone within law enforcement who had the courage to give me a call to say, take a look at this. There's a video here. Something wrong happened, and they knew that their life was on the line.
How could this verdict affect community-police relations?
Well, I think that the major thing we need in the community that everybody's saying now, economic development, I think we need the community to come forward and talk about these gangs and these shootings. And somehow we have to get the communities to understand that the policemen that are there, that are trying to do the right thing, need their help. The police need the help of the community in all these instances with these ridiculous amounts of 3,000 shootings and 500 people killed. If nobody comes forward and gives police, just, you don't have to give me a name, give me a lead, give me an idea, give me what gang, give me anything.
There's clearly a lot of mistrust on both sides.
Nobody says anything. The policemen, I don't think, mistrust the community. I think the policemen don't have any interaction with the community. And community policing never worked. And you have to get back to the beat officer knowing the people that he's working for.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. And this is a discussion to be continued. But Sharon Fairley, Craig Futterman, Gail Pasetsky, and Peter Kokonis, thank you all very much. And up next, Brandis updates us on more of the day's top stories.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part through the generous support of the Julius Frankel Foundation.
Now to some other stories making news in Chicago tonight. For his second bill signing, brand new Governor J.B. Pritzker is requiring gun dealers in Illinois to have a state license. The law attempts to crack down on illegal gun purchases by requiring firearms dealers to complete annual training, safely store weapons to prevent theft, and have employees undergo background checks. It also prohibits gun dealers from opening a business within 500 feet of a school or daycare.
There are a lot of provisions of this legislation that do much more than the federal government does, and that are an expression of the values of the people of Illinois. They're just wrong, and I'm going to continue to make sure that we're standing up to the voices like the Illinois State Rifle Association and the National Rifle Association.
Now, the Illinois State Rifle Association condemned the law, saying it's unnecessary because the federal government already regulates firearms dealers and that the $300 to $1,500 cost of registration will hurt small business owners. Supporters say that federal oversight is insufficient. Today, a tenants' rights attorney for R&B superstar R. Kelly is saying a city inspection proves his client's case. He claims no one is living in the warehouse that the singer rents on the near west side. The city inspected it on Wednesday. Attorney Melvin Sims calls the inspection by the Department of Buildings and city attorneys uneventful. He also argues that there were no dangerous or emergency conditions that should have warranted the city's emergency complaint. To the contrary, though, city inspectors yesterday said they did find evidence of residential use at the warehouse, which is not zoned as such. The case is back in court on Tuesday. And Illinois State Police are preparing to lay one of their own to rest tomorrow. At this hour, law enforcement are paying respects to the family of Trooper Christopher Lambert at Willow Creek Community Church in South Barrington. Lambert was killed Saturday night when he was struck by a car while working on another car accident on I-294 near Willow Road. He leaves behind a wife and one-year-old daughter. His funeral will be held at the same church tomorrow morning. As for the weather, tonight cloudy with a low of 24, then tomorrow a high of 29 and mostly cloudy until around 5 p.m. when the winter snow begins. National Weather Service says 4 to 6 inches of snow are possible in northern and central Illinois tomorrow night through Saturday. And don't forget, you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. You can also watch via podcast and the PBS video app. Now, Paris, back to you.
Thanks, Brandis. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, could marijuana help keep people off of opioids? Assessing the opioid crisis and efforts to save lives. A new trend called Dry January, what to expect if you give not drinking a try. Downton Abbey star Brendan Coyle talks about playing the Chicago stage for the very first time, and a preview of the Chicago International Puppet Theater Festival with Jim Henson's daughter, Heather Henson. But first, giant sweeping glass ceilings, indoor forests, and hammocks for people to sleep on between flights. These are just some of the elements proposed by 5 architectural groups selected as finalists to rebuild O'Hare's Terminal 2. It's all part of O'Hare's massive $8.5 billion expansion plan. And city officials want to hear what you think about the designs unveiled today.
The 5 mock-up plans are on display downtown at the Chicago Architectural Foundation and at O'Hare's current Terminal 2. City officials say they want the building to make a dazzling first impression on travelers coming through town.
Just imagine as they come across from China, Japan, France, Kenya, from all parts of the world, and they get off, and this is their opening to America, our O'Hare.
We're Chicago, we want the best, and we want an experience that is from the curb to the gate, is revolutionary, uses the most modern technology, has the best amenities in the world, and is the most accessible.
This one has the wood.
City officials say they selected the 5 out of 12 submissions total and are asking the public to weigh in at voteord21.com. They say 1,000 people have already voted in the first few hours. The final say, though, will come down to a secretive selection committee. The mayor's office declined to release the names of committee members, but an airline spokesperson said American United and other carriers will play a role.
We'll hand all the data over to the evaluation committee for them to use when they're evaluating the proposals.
The proposals range from this undulating roof design from a team called Fentress EXP Brooke Garza. Foster Epstein Moreno JV submitted this plan for a massive curved main hall. Chicago-based Studio ORD, featuring architect Jeannie Gang, features lots of indoor trees and even patches of grass in the floor. Chicago-based Skidmore, Owings & Merrill is proposing this naturalist design, playing up O'Hare's original designation as Orchard Field. And Santiago Calatrava, famed for the Milwaukee Museum of Art and the never-built Chicago Spire, is proposing a redesign for the terminal and adjacent hotels and parking garages. The mayor says the bold plans are needed for O'Hare to keep pace with airports around the world.
Every one of those terminals or competitors and submissions look like something you would see in the Far East or the Middle East. That's going to be right here in the Midwest.
Emmanuel has not set forth a timeline, but says he wants a design selected before he leaves office in May.
The final plan is expected to add 25% more gate capacity. It's going to increase the total footprint from 5.5 to 8.9 million square feet. And construction is expected to start in 2021 and finish in 2028 and be paid for through gate and concession fees. Well, can marijuana be an effective treatment to keep people off of opioids? A new Illinois program aims to reduce opioid addiction by allowing patients to take a prescription for painkillers and use it for cannabis instead. This is a new study shows that more people are likely to die from opioid overdose than from a car crash, and the rate is even higher in Illinois. Joining us is family physician Dr. Elizabeth Salisbury Afshar. She's the director of the Center for Multi-System Solutions to the Opioid Epidemic at the American Institute for Research. She also provides addiction treatment to patients at Heartland Alliance Health and previously was the point person for opioids at the Chicago Department of Public Health. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So, to that first question, is marijuana an effective alternative for opioids?
So I think this is an area that is really hard to answer right now, primarily because marijuana is a Schedule I drug, which means it's illegal at the federal level. So regardless of what states do, there's still a lot of limitations on how we can research it, how we use federal dollars to study it, which then means that we aren't able to do the same type of medical studies that we would for other drugs.
So you're saying we don't have clear scientific research on the cause and effect, but we have anecdotal stories?
And there are some research studies that look like it does reduce pain symptoms, that look like it may reduce opioid prescribing. There are other studies that show no benefit. And so I think the challenge right now is that we just don't have a clear sense, and the studies that are out there are not the types of studies we would want. So it's a bit better than anecdotal, but when you try to look at them across the board, it's not a consistent message to tell us, yes, this definitely is a good alternative for pain.
And with this Illinois law, if you're a patient that gets an opioid prescription, how does this pilot program work now?
So the way that the pilot program works is that if a physician deems that there is a patient who would qualify for an opioid, you can basically certify that they have a condition that then would allow them to get a short-term, I believe it's a 90-day medical marijuana card.
Is there any evidence to suggest that substituting one addictive substance for another could cause problems?
So I think, you know, this often actually comes up when we talk about opioid addiction treatment, ironically. And so I think
because methadone is usually a treatment, and that can be an addictive substance too.
So we have a really strong evidence base for medications like methadone and buprenorphine, which are themselves opioids. So it's often confusing because why would you substitute sort of one opioid for another? What we know about medications like methadone and buprenorphine, we have been able to study them. They are FDA approved for treatment of addiction, and we know that they do things like they reduce the risk that someone resumes opioid use, they reduce illicit use, they increase retention in treatment. They also reduce risk of death. And we now have multiple long-term studies with large numbers of patients showing these same findings over and over. So when we think about medical evidence, we have a lot of evidence that these treatments are extremely effective.
On the other hand, is there evidence to suggest that marijuana use could help wean people off of opioids beyond just pain management?
I think that that's where we have anecdotal evidence. You know, so we have people who say that they really feel that it helped them. But again, because we can't study it the same way that we study other drugs, we don't have that type of evidence to say sort of conclusively that this will help treat addiction or that it will wean people off opioids when they're taking opioids for pain.
I'm curious, how do medical professionals think of this sort of cultural movement away from opioids and towards cannabis?
Well, I think, you know, we definitely recognize as a medical field that we were overprescribing opioids for a long time. There was a lot of misinformation and a belief that they were much safer than they probably were. We also now understand that opioids don't have great impact on pain for people with chronic pain. So I think that's widely understood. The challenge is that we have patients who have been on opioids for a long time. It's really important to note that most people with chronic pain who take opioids long term don't have addiction. And so now figuring out how to sort of back out of that space, how to help people, how to find different modalities. Oftentimes other options are not covered by insurance, or if they are covered, they're still expensive. So things like physical therapy, you still pay copays every time you go. And so it's a really challenging space to be in right now. I think that all of us are open to exploring new options. We all want to find things to help our patients, but we also want to make sure that we're not giving people things that may increase risk.
And you mentioned overprescribing possibly, and I read a stat that said that since 1999, there are 3 times as many opioids prescribed today. Why did that happen?
Yeah, so I mean, I think like most things in life and in public health, it's sort of complicated, but we know pharmaceutical marketing definitely played a role. So this sort of really heavy promotion that these drugs were really safe, and that if they weren't working or if people still had pain, we should just prescribe more and more. We now know that those claims were not true or evidence-based. But I think, you know, there are a lot of pressures on physicians to meet patient demands, to sort of see as many people as possible, and also other alternatives, again, things like acupuncture, massage, or Tai Chi, again, sort of by the type of pain, the evidence base is a little bit different for what might work. Those things often aren't covered. And so the things that people had access to were sort of on the prescription pad. And so there were a lot of factors that really played a role. There was also a lot of pressure on doctors. We should be asking about pain every time and then treating it more aggressively. And because you work for a federally qualified health center, you can't actually prescribe marijuana because it's the federal government and marijuana is illegal on a federal level. Right, so there are certain types of clinics, federally qualified health centers, and because federally it's illegal, we are not allowed to even sort of certify people for marijuana in the way that someone in private practice would be able to. And you brought some Narcan with you today. Can you just explain what you brought? You brought the nasal spray, because this is what you give people who are overdosing. It's not a cure for opioid addiction, but it's to treat the symptom. Sure, so we know when we think about evidence-based and how to approach the opioid epidemic, we know the treatments we talked about and naloxone are 2 evidence-based practices. So thank you. Naloxone is
tilted on the table. Okay,
yeah,
so this
naloxone is a medication that can be used to reverse an overdose. Anyone, you can carry it, I can carry it, non-medical professionals can carry it. If you know someone or you see someone who's overdosing, you can give this medication. It comes in 3 formulations, and they're all here. There's the nasal spray, this one which you use a syringe to inject, and this one which actually talks to you, and it goes into the muscle.
And I know naloxone is something that hospitals are giving out more, and even Cook County Jail is giving out to inmates that are leaving. But we have to leave it there. Dr. Elizabeth Salisbury-Afshar, thank you so much for coming. And Brandis is back with more right after this.
100 years ago this week, America's so-called noble experiment, prohibition, went into effect. But fast forward to today, and many would say America has developed a very deep love and appreciation for alcohol. Aside from the beverages themselves, events like wine and paint or beer tastings at any of Chicago's microbreweries can easily make any weekend or weeknight a boozy one. But a new trend gaining steam across the country requires participants to ditch alcohol for the first month of the new year. It's called Dry January, and for some of you, we're 17 days in. Joining us to discuss the fad and its benefits are Jennifer Bruning, she's national media spokesperson for the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, and Daniel Friedberg, he's an assistant professor of psychiatry and behavioral neuroscience at the University of Chicago. Friedberg's work focuses on assessment and treatment of substance abuse and other behavioral addictions. Welcome both of you to Chicago tonight.
Thank you
for having us.
Dan, let's start with you. Where did this trend come from? How long have people been doing it?
Sure. So this is really a public health initiative that started overseas in the United Kingdom about 5 or 6 years ago and is really starting to gain steam in the United States kind of virally through social media. And the idea is, on the surface, rather simple: abstain from alcohol for an entire month.
And Jen,
in January.
In January, Dry January. Jen, why are people trying this trend?
You know, I think it's because it's tied to New Year's resolutions. You know, after the overindulgence of the holidays, oftentimes we have a desire to reconnect with our health and really just start off the new year on the right foot.
And Dan, is there a spectrum to alcohol consumption? For example, the difference between just casual drinking and addiction?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the what we would call the lower risk level of drinking would be for a woman about 7 drinks a week or fewer, for a man 14 drinks a week or fewer. Those are standard alcoholic drinks. When you exceed those limits, you really do start to see the odds or the risk factors for problems start to develop more. So you really do start to see people have problems after that.
So Jen, what are some of the benefits then to giving it up for a month?
Giving it up for a month, you can really see some nice things happen. One of the things that people see most often is that their quality of sleep really improves, which can have a trickle-down effect in every part of your life. So you have more attention, you have more focus, your mood and your attitude can really improve. Some folks can see a little bit of weight loss, and I think that the most kind of compelling reason to give this a try is to really take the time to re-examine your relationship with alcohol and what role it plays in your life.
What about all those studies that say 1 glass of red wine is good for me?
Yeah, there is some evidence that suggests that a small amount of something like red wine may have a benefit when it comes to heart health, but what needs to be remembered is that that evidence is not strong enough that people should start to drink for health reasons. On top of that, alcohol is a toxin and it can be harmful to every part of the body. So taking a step away is a very healthy thing that most people can do.
And Dan, Jen just mentioned sort of the psychological effects. No alcohol for a month can give you time to reflect on what is behind your urge to drink.
That's right. Yeah, she took the words right out of my mouth. The relationship with alcohol, I think, is really important. So are you drinking because you're bored? Are you drinking because you're depressed, anxious, to deal with other problems? That alcohol is not an especially effective coping strategy. Those of us in the psychological services business would probably recommend many other interventions that would be more effective longer term and have fewer health consequences than drinking.
What are some of the longer term benefits then to giving up alcohol for the month?
I would say, yeah, if you want to go longer than a month, you can really start to impact some of those long-term chronic health conditions that can come from an unhealthy lifestyle. So you can reduce your risk of several types of cancer, including breast cancer in women, cancers of the digestive system, as well as heart disease and diseases of the liver like cirrhosis.
Do people giving it up, do they ever find themselves using sugar to replace alcohol? It becomes a crutch. You want something comforting.
Absolutely. It's important if you're going to give up something like alcohol that you have a plan in place for healthy behaviors that you'll replace that alcohol with. And so even things like having other beverages around that you can be excited about, like various flavors of sparkling water that are so on trend right now, or making mocktails at home, any of those kinds of things can give you something else that you can enjoy in place of that alcohol so that you're not taking in things like comfort foods and lots of sugar and other things that are working against you in the long run.
And I want to come back to the mocktails. Dan, what are your tips to stay motivated through January?
Well, I think the main thing to think about is, why are you doing this project? Why are you deciding to abstain from alcohol in the month of January? What are your own reasons? It might be challenging to motivate yourself if your reason is because you saw it on Facebook. It might be more motivating to you if you think about your desire to maybe lose weight, your desire to re-examine your relationship with alcohol, your desire to explore other activities, and so forth.
Does it also help to have maybe a buddy or a community doing the same thing, not just on Facebook, but something similar?
Yeah, I think that could really be helpful. I often advise my patients when they're coming in and they're talking to me about slowing down or stopping drinking. I say, you know, bring people into this with you. Let your friends and family, those that you trust, know about this so that they can help you and support you.
Dan kind of mentioned it, the dry why. Jen, what is it and how can it motivate you to stay dry?
It's exactly what Dan was saying, that the dry why is just, it's your motivation, it's your reason for taking this on. And so maybe if it's, you want to be a more present parent, maybe that's having a picture of your kids on your phone or on your fridge to remind you. Maybe it's a daily reminder that pops up on your phone to keep saying, you know, oh, that's why I'm doing this. That's right. You know, I can stay strong and get through this time.
And Dan, what if someone realizes over the course of this month that they actually do need help?
Yeah, I would say the first place to start, always a good idea to talk to your physician. That's probably the first place to start for most people. Reach out to them, let them know what your concerns are, and go from there would be my advice.
And Jen, we have to leave everybody with the mocktail. Quick recipe to try at home.
Yes,
it's a faux cocktail, basically.
Yes, I love a faux hito. So that's a mojito without the alcohol. Real simple. It's just sparkling water. You can do plain. I like lime flavored. You do the lime and the mint in the glass just like you would. And then a little something sweet. You can do lemon lime soda if you have that hanging around the house, or you can do a little bit of honey, sugar, or agave syrup just to give it a little bit of a sweet taste and really make that refreshing mint and lime really stand out.
Sounds refreshing. I think we've got some examples on our website as well. Jennifer Bruning, Daniel Friedberg, thank you both for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And as I mentioned, you can visit our website for other mocktail recipes and tips to stay motivated. And from Downton Abbey to downtown Chicago, a British actor has brought his acting skills from the TV screen to the stage. Chicago Tonight caught up with Brendan Coyle for his local debut at the Goodman Theater. Eddie Aruza has that story.
I'm John Bates, the new valet.
The new valet?
That's right.
On Downton Abbey, Brendan Coyle made a memorable impression as Mr. John Bates, the valet of Lord Grantham. Through 6 seasons of the hit series, the character earns the respect of the staff amid threatening accusations and a budding romance. We asked the actor about the experience of playing a key role in the Downton Abbey ensemble.
It was phenomenal. We still don't really understand it. When we got those scripts, we had 3 scripts, 3 first episodes. We thought, this is pretty solid, bums on seats, this is going to work well on a Sunday night. Maggie Smith's in it. There was good yarns, good stories. We thought it'll do all right, but then it just tipped into something else. You don't know what that tipping point is, and you can't really bottle that, you know. And it became a global thing, and it's been a great ride. You know, what a gig. Everyone wants to be in a hit.
I'll be all right.
Of course you will.
The success of Downton follows him around the world.
When I got here, I turned on the TV, and there it was on PBS. So it kind of it continues. We just wrapped on the movie in November, so the story continues.
I was a character, famous in all the wrong ways.
Coyle is currently at the Goodman Theater portraying a theater critic haunted by personal demons and possibly vampires. The play is St. Nicholas by the Irish playwright Conor McPherson, who has a penchant for the supernatural.
He's one of Conor McPherson's most monstrous creations, I think, and why he chose a theatre critic to be his most monstrous creation, I don't know. There may be something going on. But he's pretty awful, yeah, and he's disillusioned, he's full of self-loathing, he's full of loathing for the people he criticises, he's full of envy for their art, he's a frustrated writer himself, his marriage is in decline, his kids don't want anything to do with him, his life's in freefall.
As the lone actor in the show, Brendan Coyle directly addresses the audience in the Goodman's Small Owen Theatre.
We all take part in this convention. And you will say, they aren't very believable, are they? These vampires.
This space has an intimacy, the Owen. It's a beautiful space, and it gives us, as our team, the ability to connect with people in a very direct way. And direct address allows the story to unlock things in people's minds, I think. It's, yeah, it's immediate. We break that fourth wall. It's a two-hander, this piece. It's me and the audience. And the atmosphere is different. The energy is different every night. You know, Chicago audiences have been fantastic. They get the humor, the quality of listening to this piece has been amazing. It's been really gratifying for all of us.
Coyle sees the playwright's paranormal plot as something of a metaphor.
It's a theme. It's a kind of sense of longing, a desire to connect that we all have. I mean, in post-Catholic Ireland, he still writes about spirits and an otherness and otherworldliness that we're all fascinated by. And transcendence he's interested in. Ghost stories and the supernatural, the themes that run through his work. And they create a kind of frisson in all of us, where we're all looking for answers, or looking for a way to connect and understand. And it's something he uses beautifully. Sometimes it's a way just to bring people in to tell some kind of truth or get to the heart of something. But it's a very captivating way of storytelling. He uses the ancient art of Irish storytelling and spins it in a very modern way.
I usually had reviews written before the show was finished.
He may be the only performer in this show, but we asked again about the famous ensemble and the Downton Abbey movie that is currently scheduled to open in theaters in September.
Well, it's a direct continuation from the last time we saw these characters. It doesn't embrace any sort of particular historic event like the Titanic or World War I, you know, those big historical events that we incorporated. So it's very much a story about what's happening to that family. There's a royal visit. So it's going to be very grand, and it's going to look amazing.
Until then, you can see him in a role that is quite separate from Mr. Bates.
If you come to this because you're a fan of the writing of Downton, I think you're in for a very different experience.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Eddie Aruza.
St. Nicholas is at the Goodman Theater until January 27th. Hear more from actor Brendan Coyle on our website. And we're back with more right after this.
Don't ever miss Chicago Tonight. Subscribe to our podcast. Get a daily download of our show delivered to your desktop or mobile device. Go to WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight Podcast and subscribe.
Every other year, Chicago temporarily becomes the puppet capital of the world. That's when the Chicago International Puppet Theater Festival brings in puppet artists from around the world to perform shows across the city for both kids and adults. 2019 marks the third edition of the biennial festival, and puppet and theater artists are here from Japan, France, Chile, Israel, and Chicago. We're pleased to welcome two of these artists, Heather Henson from the famous family of puppeteers, may have heard of them, and Ty Defoe. Welcome to you both. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. We're happy to be here.
So the show that the two of you co-directed, it kicks off the festival. Tell us about A G-Jack on Turtle Island.
This is a story that we've been working on for many years, and it's a story about a whooping crane. And a whooping crane on its first migration, traveling all the way from Canada, Wood Buffalo, Canada, down to Texas and back on its first migration. And it,
Yeah, and along the way, G-Jack, the small crane, she meets various indigenous people who are stewards and taking care of the earth of both the past, the present, and of course giving messages for future generations to come about the sustainability and how to take care of the earth.
And A G-Jack is on Turtle Island. Tell me about the name Turtle Island. Where does that come from?
Yeah, Turtle Island is often referred to by First Nations people, Indigenous people, Native American people as the United States, Canada, and also Mexico. So if you kind of Google, go on Google search and pull out, you can kind of see the entire continent is the shape of a turtle's back. And so because of her migration flight from all the way to the north, down south, and back up again, we thought it's, really great to place it on the land at which she's flying over.
And Heather, you're also an environmentalist, and it seems that work is obviously reflected in this work. How do those two collide? How do they come together?
Yeah, I've actually, all of my shows have always been about the environment and highlighting how people can live sustainably on the land and how we can live in harmony with our environment and the animals that we all share the space with. So I couldn't do the show without working with like the stories from the First Nations people that are from this land. We are on Indigenous land, we are on First Nations land, and so looking at that lifestyle and then telling the story of the crane. So the crane, and in particular, the whooping crane is the largest bird in North America, and it's also the most rare of all 15 species of birds is a whooping crane. So here on this continent, this bird, it rapidly declined at the time of colonization, but then went down to like less than about 20 birds were left. But then the numbers have been rising, and it is a bird that is coming back and with strength. And a lot of people have been working together to make this bird coming back in these great numbers.
And Ty, tell us a little bit about your backstory. You're from the Midwest, from the area.
I am. I grew up in, yeah, definitely. I grew up in northern Wisconsin. And so some of my backstory is all throughout Wisconsin, you know, growing up, learning about oral stories from traditional elders, and then also as an artist making my own contemporary art. So I've been all over the state of Wisconsin, somewhat in Chicago and in Michigan and in Minnesota, because I'm half Anishinaabe Nation and as well as from the Oneida Nation, which is the natural homelands to my people. And so I have a really strong connection to the Great Lakes area, having, you know, memories of being a child growing up there, but also I think it's really important because of the importance of water and how we need to steward over water.
And you have that Grammy Award. Tell us about the work that earned that award.
Yeah, well, you know, growing up in Wisconsin and just sort of collaborating with really wonderful artists, you know, like Heather and some other folks like on the show, our design team, as well as the actors and performers in it. You know, I'm a flautist. I do traditional drumming and singing and vocables, and that's sort of my background is in world music, where I, you know, met artists and we traveled around the world doing various cultural exchanges, talking about story and various ways to tell these stories, whether it's through a song, dance, or theater.
And Heather, of course, we'd be remiss if we didn't take this opportunity to ask you about your father, Jim Henson, creator of the Muppets and so much more. And we actually have a picture of you with your father, an adorable picture of you with your father in 1978. What was it like coming from such a creative family?
Well, that particular picture is from the opening of the Center for Puppetry Arts in Atlanta. I remember that. I was 7 years old.
Yes. And then your father, Jim Henson's in the middle, obviously, but Kermit is on the other side.
Yeah. Oh, and that's my whole family there. So we had, there's 5 siblings in the whole family. So it was a great family to grow up in, very creative, and my dad really loved the art form of puppetry, and he not only did his own puppetry, but he supported other artists and made, oh, look at that. Yeah, and so he loved the whole art form and actually was very involved in the puppet community that I think is really exciting that this puppet festival is highlighting the wide breadth of what puppetry can be. And it's at a place like this, a puppet festival, you can see all the different styles of puppetry that are out there. Because my dad did one style of puppetry, he became very famous for that style, but he actually himself did try worked other styles in, and then in his genre of puppets, he actually did like work marionettes in, and some like oversized full like Bossman style puppetry. And it was a very creative family to grow up in, and really we did get to see how beautiful this art form was.
Would you say it's sort of in your DNA then, or was there a lot of puppetry going on around the house growing up?
A lot of creativity, a lot of creative crafts. Holidays were always about like pumpkin carving in the most like extreme creative way, and Easter egg dyeing in very, very elaborate, you know, crafty styles of doing things. But puppetry was actually usually when we went to go visit my dad on the sets, and then we would get to see the puppetry. And then also going to puppet festivals.
Obviously, and we're going to come back to this one in just a minute, but Ty, puppetry is an ancient art form. What are some of the challenges in presenting it to 21st century audiences?
I think some of the challenges are, you know, I guess sort of unveiling what people know about maybe puppetry or about theater or about sort of what people know. So I think like the idea is that some of the challenges faced are, you know, presenting puppetry maybe in a new way, presenting stories in a new kind of way, where we're talking about, you know, cross-cultural learning within music and within art forms, that these things have existed for, you know, 500 years plus, even beyond human beings, right? That we're also talking about ecosystems and nature also having their forms of puppetry. Just when you walk out into the woods and trees, there's also, you know, various things that existed before human species ever, you know, walk the earth. So when you take a big concept like that and talk about, you know, telling stories, I think like the idea is trying to get these new ideas across that have existed from the past.
Heather Henson, Ty Defoe, thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
And the Chicago International Puppet Theater Festival runs through January 27th at multiple locations, and there's much more on our website, and we'll be right back after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Allstate. Allstate is investing in Chicago's youth. We believe good starts young. That's why we're helping our youth develop the skills they need to achieve success in life. Allstate is proud to empower the next generation of leaders.
And that's our show for this Thursday night. Stay connected by signing up for our daily briefing and join us tomorrow night live at 7 for a special edition of the Week in Review.
We'll bring you reaction and analysis following tomorrow's sentencing of former Chicago cop Jason Van Dyke.
Now for all of us at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. I thank you for watching. Good night.
Closed captioning for this program is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.